The kingdom of Obiora was not like other lands. It was a place where the wind seemed to carry stories, where the earth itself felt ancient, and where tradition was not merely followed, it was obeyed. The people believed their customs were gifts from their ancestors, sacred laws woven into the very fabric of their existence. To question them was to question the gods. To break them was to invite ruin. At the heart of the kingdom stood the royal palace, a vast structure of red earth and carved stone, adorned with symbols of past victories and ancestral pride. Tall pillars lined its entrance, each etched with the story of a great warrior who had once defended Obiora from its enemies. The palace was not just a home for the king. It was a monument to strength, because in Obiora, strength was everything. Not just the strength of the body, but the strength to lead, to protect, and to endure. And no tradition embodied this belief more than the law of strength. Every generation, when the king deemed the time right, a grand contest would be held. Men from every corner of the kingdom would gather to fight, not out of hatred, but out of honor. The winner would earn the greatest prize of all, the hand of the king's daughter in marriage. It was said that no weak man should ever sit close to the throne. And so, the future of the royal bloodline was entrusted to the strongest. The sun rose, casting a golden glow across the land. The marketplace buzzed with life, women arranging baskets of fresh fruits, traders shouting prices, children running barefoot through narrow paths, their laughter echoing like music. But beneath the usual rhythm of the day, there was something else: excitement, anticipation. The great contest was near. Groups of young men gathered under trees, boasting of their strength and speaking boldly of victory. "I will defeat them all," one said, flexing his arms as others cheered. "You?" another laughed. "You cannot even carry a goat without trembling." Old men sat nearby, shaking their heads with knowing smiles. "Let them talk," one elder murmured. "The arena humbles every man." Even the women whispered among themselves, their voices laced with curiosity. "Who will win this time? Will it be someone from the northern farms? Or that hunter they say killed a lion with his bare hands?" "No matter who it is," another said quietly, "his life will change forever." Because it always did. Inside the palace, however, the mood was different. Calmer. Heavier. King Harlan sat on his throne, his face lined with years of wisdom and burden. He was a man who had seen war, loss, and victory. His decisions had shaped the kingdom, and his word was law. Yet today, there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. Before him stood his two daughters, Selene and Mira. They were as different as fire and water. Selene, the younger, stood tall with her chin lifted high. Her beauty was striking, sharp features, glowing skin, and eyes that sparkled not with kindness, but with pride. She wore her confidence like a crown, and her presence filled the room like a storm waiting to break. Myra, the elder, stood beside her, calm and composed. Her beauty was softer, quieter, but no less powerful. There was a gentleness in her eyes, a warmth that made people feel at ease. Where Selene demanded attention, Mira inspired respect. They were both daughters of a king, but only one carried the heart of the kingdom. King Harlan studied them in silence before speaking. "The time has come," he said, his deep voice echoing through the chamber. "The great contest will be held." Selene's lips curled into a small smile. Mira lowered her gaze slightly, thoughtful. "You both know what this means," the king continued. "One of you will be given to the victor." Celine stepped forward immediately. "Father," she said, her tone confident, almost dismissive. "Must we truly follow this old tradition again?" The room grew still. The king's eyes hardened slightly. "It is not old," he replied. "It is sacred." Celine sighed, clearly unimpressed. "With all respect, father, times are changing. Should a princess not have the right to choose her own husband?" Mira glanced at her sister, a hint of concern crossing her face. The king leaned forward, his voice firmer now. "Celine, you speak as though you are above the laws of this land." "I am not above them," Celine replied quickly, "but I am not blind to them either." Her boldness lingered in the air like a challenge. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mira stepped forward gently. "Father," she said softly, "we understand the importance of tradition. We will honor your decision." Her voice was calm, respectful, like cool water soothing a flame. The king's expression softened slightly as he looked at her. "You have always understood," he said quietly. Celine rolled her eyes, turning away. "Of course she does," she muttered under her breath. Later that day, the sisters walked through the palace gardens. The air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers, and the sound of birds chirping created a peaceful melody. Servants moved quietly in the background, careful not to disturb the royal daughters. Celine walked ahead, her steps sharp and impatient. "I cannot believe this," she snapped. "Married off like a prize to some brute who knows nothing but fighting." Mira followed calmly. "He will not be just a brute," she said gently. "He will be strong, and strength protects the kingdom." Celine turned sharply. "And what about happiness, Mira? Does strength guarantee that?" Mira paused. "No," she admitted, "but neither does pride." Celine scoffed. "You always speak in riddles." "And you always speak in anger," Mira replied softly. That only made Celine more irritated. "I will not live my life in a mud hut with a man who smells of sweat and soil," she declared. "I deserve more." Mira studied her sister carefully. "Or perhaps," she said quietly, "you expect more than life is willing to give." Celine's eyes flashed. "I will choose my own destiny," she said firmly. "You'll see." Mira said nothing, but deep down, she felt something shifting, like the first rumble of a storm that had yet to arrive. As evening fell, the kingdom glowed under the warm light of torches. Drummers gathered in the village square, practicing rhythms that would soon echo through the arena. Children mimicked fighters, laughing as they playfully wrestled in the dust. High above it all, the palace stood silent and watchful. In his chamber, King Harlan stood by the window, gazing out at his kingdom. He had ruled for many years. He had upheld every tradition. But now, as a father, he felt the weight of his decision more than ever. 2 daughters, 2 futures, 1 law. "May the gods guide us," he whispered, "because everything would change, and not even a king could stop what was coming." The kingdom of Obiora did not wake gently. It stirred. It shifted. Before the sun had fully stretched across the sky, a strange sound broke through the usual rhythm of village life, the distant thunder of hooves against hardened earth. At first, the villagers thought little of it. Travelers passed through Obiora from time to time, traders, messengers, wandering hunters. But this was different. The sound was too coordinated, too powerful, too deliberate. Children were the first to notice. "They're coming!" one boy shouted, pointing toward the main road that led into the kingdom. Within moments, the marketplace began to swell with curious eyes. Traders abandoned their stalls. Women wiped their hands hastily on wrappers, and elders leaned on their staffs as they slowly made their way forward. Then they saw them, a procession unlike anything Obiora had witnessed in years. At the front rode men clad in polished armor, their spears gleaming under the rising sun. Their horses were tall, strong, and well-fed, nothing like the lean animals the villagers were used to. Behind them came attendants carrying chests, heavy, ornate, and locked with gold clasps. And at the center of it all rode the prince, Prince Caspian. He sat tall on a white stallion, dressed in garments that shimmered with wealth. His robe was embroidered with fine gold thread, his fingers adorned with rings, and a confident smile rested on his lips like he owned not just the road, but the world. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Who is he? He must be royalty. Look at the guards. This is no ordinary visitor." The whispers grew louder as the procession came to a halt at the palace gates. Inside the palace, word traveled quickly. "A royal visitor has arrived, Your Majesty," a guard announced, kneeling before King Harlan. The king frowned slightly. "A royal visitor?" he repeated. "From where?" "He claims to be Prince Caspian of the neighboring kingdom, Your Majesty." At the mention of the name, a flicker of recognition crossed the king's face. He had heard of that kingdom, wealthy, powerful, but not without rumors. Still, a prince was a prince. "Prepare the reception hall," King Harlan commanded. "We will receive him." The great hall of the palace was soon filled with quiet anticipation. Chiefs and elders took their places. Guards lined the walls. Servants moved gracefully, laying out fine mats and pouring palm wine into carved cups. And then, the doors opened. Prince Caspian entered as though the moment had been created solely for him. His steps were slow, confident, each one echoing softly against the polished floor. His guards followed, stopping at a respectful distance, while two attendants carried forward one of the ornate chests. He bowed slightly. "Your Majesty," he said smoothly, his voice rich and controlled. "It is an honor to stand in the presence of the great King Harlan of Obiora." The king studied him carefully before responding. "You are welcome in our land, Prince Caspian," he said. "What brings you to Obiora?" The prince smiled. "I come with respect and intention." At a subtle gesture from him, the attendant stepped forward and opened the chest. Collective gasps filled the hall. Inside were treasures beyond imagination. Gold ornaments, sparkling gemstones, finely crafted jewelry that caught the light like captured stars. "These are gifts," the prince said, "a token of my respect for your throne." The king's expression remained calm, but his eyes missed nothing. This was not just generosity, it was strategy. "And your intention?" the king asked. The prince's gaze shifted briefly, just for a moment, toward the entrance of the hall. As if on cue, the doors parted again. Celine and Mira entered. Celine noticed him immediately, and everything else faded. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to still. She had seen handsome men before, warriors, nobles, visiting dignitaries. But this was different. Prince Caspian did not just look powerful. He radiated it. His confidence, his posture, the effortless way he carried himself. It drew her in like a flame draws a moth. Their eyes met, and he smiled. Not a polite smile, not a respectful one, but something deeper, something knowing. Mira, walking beside her sister, noticed the exchange instantly, and something about it unsettled her. The prince turned back to the king. "My intention," he said clearly, "is to ask for the hand of one of your daughters in marriage." The hall fell silent, Even the air seemed to pause. Celine's heart leapt. Mira's fingers tightened slightly at her side. King Harlan leaned back slowly, his expression unreadable. "You arrive at an interesting time," he said. "I am aware," Prince Caspian replied smoothly. "The great contest approaches. Then you also know our law?" The prince nodded. "I do. Only the strongest man in the kingdom may claim the princess." "Then why are you here?" the king asked. A faint smile touched the prince's lips. "Because I believe some traditions can be reconsidered." A murmur spread through the chiefs. Dangerous words. Bold words. The king's gaze sharpened. "In Obiora," he said firmly, "tradition is not a suggestion. It is law." The prince held his gaze unshaken. "And yet," he said, "laws are made by kings." The tension in the room thickened, but then, unexpectedly, the king smiled faintly. "You are bold," he said. "I am honest," the prince replied. Before the moment could escalate further, Mira stepped forward slightly. "Father," she said gently, "perhaps the prince should be allowed to stay as a guest until the contest is over." Her voice softened the room. The king considered her words, then nodded. "You will stay," he said to the prince. "You will be our guest." Celine's heart soared. "But understand this," the king continued, his tone firm once more. "The contest will proceed, and its outcome will not be ignored." Prince Caspian bowed slightly. "As you wish, Your Majesty." But there was something in his eyes that suggested he was not concerned, not in the slightest. That evening, the palace buzzed with excitement. Servants whispered. Guards exchanged glances. Even the elders spoke in hushed tones about the prince's boldness. But in her chambers, Celine was restless. She stood before a polished mirror, adjusting her hair, her jewelry, her expression. "He chose to come here," she murmured to herself. "For me." She didn't question it. In her mind, it was already decided. She would not marry some unknown warrior. She would be a queen. A soft knock came at her door. "Enter," she said. Mira stepped inside. "You've been quiet," Mira observed. Celine turned, a small smile playing on her lips. "Have you ever seen someone like him?" she asked. Mira hesitated. "He is impressive," she admitted carefully. Celine laughed lightly. "Impressive? Mira, he is everything." Mira walked closer. "You barely know him." "I don't need to," Celine replied quickly. "I can see it." "See what?" "My future." Mira studied her sister, concern deepening. "Celine, be careful." Celine frowned. "Careful of what?" "Of wanting something so quickly," Mira said softly. "Not everything that shines is gold." Celine interrupted sharply. "Spare me." She turned away. "I know what I want." Mira sighed quietly. "And what if the contest chooses differently?" Celine's reflection hardened. "It won't?" "And if it does?" Celine turned back slowly, her eyes cold now. "Then I will choose for myself." That night, as the palace slept, Prince Caspian stood alone on a balcony overlooking the kingdom. The moonlight cast shadows across his face. One of his guards approached quietly. "My prince," he said, "everything is in place." The prince nodded. "Good." "And the contest?" A small, dangerous smile spread across Caspian's lips. "Let them have their contest," he said. "In the end, I always win." He turned his gaze toward the distant village, toward the unknown, toward the future that was already beginning to twist in unexpected ways. Back in her chamber, Mira lay awake. Something didn't feel right. She couldn't explain it, but deep in her heart, she felt it clearly. The arrival of the prince had not brought opportunity. It had brought change, and not all change was good. The day the kingdom had been waiting for finally arrived. It did not begin quietly. Before dawn had fully broken, the air itself seemed charged, like the earth knew something significant was about to unfold. A low hum of anticipation rippled through Obiora, stirring even those who had no part in the contest. By the time the first rays of sunlight touched the land, the village was already awake. Women tied their wrappers tightly, balancing baskets on their heads as they hurried toward the arena grounds. Men gathered in groups, their voices loud and animated, arguing over who would win. Children ran barefoot through the dusty paths, their laughter cutting through the tension like sparks in dry grass. Today was not just another day. It was the day, the great contest. At the center of the kingdom stood the arena, a vast circular ground surrounded by wooden barricades and raised platforms for spectators. It had witnessed generations of battles, each one etched into the memory of the people. Today, it was alive. Drummers lined the edges, their hands moving in perfect rhythm, producing deep, thunderous beats that echoed across the land. The sound was not just music, it was a call to strength, to courage, to destiny. The crowd surged in waves, filling every space, every corner. High above them all, under a decorated canopy, sat the royal family. King Harlan, regal and composed. Beside him, Celine and Mira. Celine leaned forward, her eyes scanning the arena eagerly. She wore her finest attire, beads resting elegantly on her neck, her hair adorned with gold ornaments. But her beauty today was sharpened by something else: expectation, possession. She had already decided how this day would end. Mira, seated beside her, looked equally stunning, but her expression was calmer, more thoughtful. Her eyes moved across the crowd, not searching for glory, but for understanding. She felt it again, that quiet, persistent unease. Then came the signal. A loud horn blasted through the air. The crowd roared. From one end of the arena, the contestants began to enter. They came in groups at first, farmers with strong arms hardened by years of labor, hunters with sharp eyes and lean, deadly builds, warriors with scars etched into their skin, marks of battles fought and survived. Each man carried himself with pride, with determination, with the burning hope of victory. The crowd reacted loudly to each familiar face. "That is Okike. He defeated 3 men last year. And look, Udo, the strongest man from the northern farms. He will win. I am certain of it." Excitement grew with every entrance, but then the noise began to fade because someone else had stepped into the arena. He came alone. No cheering followed him. No one called his name. In fact, no one seemed to know it. He was tall, taller than most. His body was solid, sculpted not by training grounds, but by real work. His skin bore no decorative scars, no symbols of fame, only the quiet marks of survival. His clothing was simple, worn, unremarkable. And yet there was something about him, something that made people pause, something that made the air shift. "Who is that?" a voice whispered. "I've never seen him before. He must be from a distant village. He looks like a nobody." The murmur spread quickly. Up in the royal canopy, Celine frowned. "He cannot be serious," she muttered. "They allow just anyone into the contest now?" Mira said nothing. Her eyes lingered on him. There was something in the way he walked, not arrogance, not fear, just stillness, like a river that runs deep and silent. The horn sounded again. The contest had begun. The first rounds were chaotic. Men clashed in bursts of strength and fury, grappling, throwing, striking, pushing each other into the dust. The crowd roared with every fall, every victory, every display of power. Fighters were eliminated quickly. Some fell with dignity, others with desperation. The arena became a storm of movement and noise, and through it all, the unknown man moved. At first, no one paid him much attention. He fought without spectacle, without shouting, without drawing attention. But one by one, his opponents fell. Effortlessly. The first man charged at him with a loud roar. The stranger sidestepped, a quick movement almost too fast to follow, and the man was on the ground. The second tried brute force. He was lifted and thrown aside like weightless wood. The third attempted strategy. It didn't matter. Each fight ended the same way. Quick, clean, decisive, slowly. The crowd began to notice. Wait, is that the same man? He hasn't lost a single round. But murmurs turned into whispers. Whispers turned into focused attention. Up above, Mira leaned forward slightly. Her heart was beginning to beat faster. Celine, however, looked irritated. "It's luck," she said dismissively. "He'll fall soon enough." But he didn't. Round after round, the number of contestants shrank. The strongest remained, men who had trained their entire lives, men who had won before, men who were expected to win again. And yet, the unknown man still stood among them, unshaken, unbothered, unmatched. By midday, the sun burned high in the sky. Sweat glistened on bodies. Dust clung to skin. The arena had become a battlefield of endurance. Only a handful of fighters remained. Among them, the stranger. Now the tension was undeniable. Every eye was on him. Every whisper carried his presence. "Who is he? Where did he come from? This is not normal." Even the elders began to murmur among themselves. "This man," one said quietly, "he fights like someone who has nothing to lose." The next match placed him against Udo, the giant of the northern farms. The crowd erupted. "This is it. Now we will see his end." Udo stepped forward, massive and confident. "You've done well," he said, cracking his knuckles, "but this is where it ends." The stranger said nothing. He simply stood, calm, waiting. The horn sounded. Udo charged. The ground seemed to shake beneath his weight. The crowd held its breath. Then, in a single fluid motion, the stranger moved. Not back, not away, forward. What happened next was so fast, many barely saw it. A shift, a turn, precise strike, and Udo, undefeated for years, was on the ground. Silence, total, absolute silence. Then the arena exploded. "No! How? That is impossible." Even King Harlan leaned forward, his expression no longer calm. Celine's mouth fell open. Mira's hand rose slowly to her chest. Her heart was racing now, not from fear, not from excitement, but from something deeper, something she did not yet understand. The final rounds passed like a blur. No one could stop him. No one could match him. And as the sun began its slow descent, there was only one man left standing, the unknown warrior. The horn sounded one last time, long, loud, final. A voice rose above the crowd. "The victor has been decided." All eyes turned to the center of the arena, where he stood, alone, unchallenged, unquestioned. King Harlan rose slowly to his feet. "This man," he declared, his voice carrying across the entire arena, "has proven himself the strongest in Obiora." The crowd erupted once more. Cheers, shock, disbelief, and something else. Respect. But in the royal canopy, everything had changed. Celine's face had hardened completely. "No," she whispered. "No, this cannot happen." Mira sat still, her eyes fixed on the man below, the man who had just changed her future. Because by the law of the land, he had just won her hand in marriage, and somewhere deep within her, that quiet unease returned, stronger than before. The celebration in the arena did not reach the palace. While the villagers sang, danced, and lifted the unknown warrior onto their shoulders, inside the royal walls, silence ruled. Heavy, uncomfortable, unavoidable. The sun had begun its descent, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, as if the heavens themselves were marking the significance of what had just occurred. In the royal chambers, King Harlan stood by the window, his hands clasped behind his back. He had witnessed many contests, many victories, many warriors rise and fall, but never had the outcome unsettled him like this. A stranger, a man with no name, no lineage, no known past, and yet undeniably the strongest. The law had spoken, and the law could not be ignored. A soft knock broke the silence. "Enter," the king said. A guard stepped in and bowed. "Your Majesty, the princesses have arrived." The king exhaled slowly. "Send them in." Moments later, Selena and Mira entered the chamber. The contrast between them felt sharper now than ever before. Celine's steps were quick, her expression already clouded with anger. Her beauty, though still striking, was now edged with frustration and disbelief. Mira walked beside her, slower, quieter. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried questions, questions she had not yet spoken aloud. They both bowed slightly. "You called for us, Father." King Harlan turned to face them. For a moment, he simply looked at them, not as a king, but as a father. Then his expression hardened slightly. "You both witnessed the outcome of the contest," he began. Celine crossed her arms immediately. "I witnessed a mistake," she said sharply. Mira glanced at her, a silent warning in her eyes, but Celine ignored it. The king's gaze settled on her. "There was no mistake," he said firmly. "The strongest man won. The law has been fulfilled." "The law is flawed," Celine snapped. The words landed like a slap. The air in the room shifted instantly. Mira's heart skipped. "Celine," she whispered softly, but it was too late. King Harlan took a slow step forward. "You speak boldly today," he said, his voice low but dangerous. Celine lifted her chin. "I speak truth," she replied. "That man is nothing. No name, no status, no future. And you would give one of your daughters to him?" The king's eyes darkened. "That nothing defeated every man in this kingdom," he said. "Strength is not given by status. It is proven." Celine let out a bitter laugh. "So strength is all that matters? Not dignity, not honor, not worth?" "Strength protects dignity," the king replied sharply. "Strength preserves honor. Without it, kingdoms fall." Celine shook her head, pacing now. "No," she said. "This is madness. I will not be part of it." Mira stepped forward gently. "Father," she said softly, "perhaps we can discuss." "There is nothing to discuss," the king interrupted. His voice was final now, decisive. The warrior has earned his right. One of you will marry him. The other will be given to the prince." At the mention of the prince, Celine froze. Slowly she turned. "That is already decided," she said. The king's brow furrowed. "It is not for you to decide," he replied. "I have decided," Celine repeated, her voice rising. "I will marry the prince." "Celine," the king said, warning now evident in his tone. "You forget yourself." "No," she shot back. "For once I remember exactly who I am." The tension snapped. Mira felt it, like a string pulled too tight, ready to break. "You are my daughter," King Harlan said, his voice firm and controlled. "And you will follow the laws of this kingdom." "I am also a human being," Celine shouted. "Not a prize to be handed over to some villager." Her words echoed through the chamber, each one heavier than the last. Mira's chest tightened. "Celine, please," she said, reaching out slightly, but Celine pulled away. "I will not marry him," she declared. "I refuse." Silence, thick, dangerous. The king's face had gone still, too still. "And if I command it?" he asked quietly. Celine hesitated, but only for a moment. "Then you will force me," she said, "and I will hate you for it." The words struck deep. For a brief second, the king's composure cracked, not as a ruler, but as a father. But just as quickly, it returned. "You test my patience," he said. "I test your fairness," Celine fired back. Mira stepped between them now. "Enough, please," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly, but steady enough to cut through the storm. "This is not the way." Both of them turned to her. For a moment, the anger paused, and in that pause, Mira felt the weight of everything. The kingdom, the tradition, her father, her sister, the future, all resting on a single moment. She looked at Celine first, her younger sister. Stubborn, proud, but still family. Still someone she loved. Then she looked at her father, a king bound by duty, a man trapped between law and love. And in that instant, Mira understood something neither of them could see. This was not just about marriage, it was about peace. "I will marry the warrior," she said. The words fell softly, but they carried the weight of thunder. Celine blinked. "What?" she said. The king straightened slightly. "Mira," but she continued. "It is my duty as the elder," she said calmly. "And if it brings peace to this house, then I accept it." Celine stared at her in disbelief. "You cannot be serious," she said. Mira turned to her, offering a small, gentle smile. "It is all right." "No, it is not," Celine snapped. "You don't even know him." "Neither do you know the prince," Mira replied quietly. "That is different." "How?" Celine faltered, just for a second. "You are giving up your life," Celine said, her voice lower now, but still sharp. "For what? Tradition?" "For peace," Mira answered. Celine shook her head. "You're weak," she muttered. The words hung in the air, but Mira did not react, because deep down, she knew the truth. This was not weakness. It was strength of a different kind. King Harlan stepped forward slowly. He looked at Mira, not as a king now, but as a father seeing something he could not ignore. "You understand what this means," he said quietly. Mira nodded. "Yes, father. You will leave the palace. Yes. You will live as he lives. Yes." There was no hesitation, no fear in her voice, only acceptance. The king closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. "So it shall be," he declared. His voice carried finality, decision, fate. "Mira, daughter of Obiora, will marry the victor of the great contest." He turned to Selene. "And you will be given to Prince Caspian." Selene exhaled sharply. Relief flooded her face, but it was quickly replaced by something else, something she didn't quite understand, because for a brief moment, watching her sister stand there, calm and unwavering, Selene felt something unfamiliar, something uncomfortable. Guilt. But she pushed it away. "I will prepare for my wedding," she said quickly, turning toward the door. Without another word, she left. The room grew quiet again, just Mira and her father. King Harlan walked closer to her. "You have done something great today," he said. Mira shook her head gently. "I have done what was needed." The king studied her. "You deserve more than this." Mira smiled faintly. "Perhaps this is exactly what I deserve." But even as she said it, a small part of her wondered what kind of life awaited her. Who was this man she had agreed to marry? And why did her heart feel both calm and uncertain at the same time? That night, as the palace prepared for two very different weddings, two very different futures were set in motion. One built on pride and desire, the other on sacrifice and quiet strength. And neither sister yet understood just how deeply their choices would shape their destinies. The palace had never felt so heavy, not even during times of war, not even during seasons of mourning. But on the morning of Mira's wedding, the grand halls of Obiora carried a strange silence, one that pressed gently against the walls, lingered in corners, and settled deep into the hearts of those who walked through them. Servants moved quietly, their usual chatter replaced with whispers. Even the birds that perched along the palace rooftops seemed to sing more softly, as though they understood that something delicate was unfolding. This was no ordinary wedding. It was not filled with anticipation. It was filled with acceptance. Mira sat before a polished bronze mirror in her chambers, surrounded by women carefully preparing her for the ceremony. Her hair was braided neatly, adorned with simple beads, not the extravagant gold she was used to, but something more modest, more grounded. Her attire reflected the same. Gone were the heavy royal ornaments. Gone were the layered silks and embroidered fabrics that marked her as a princess. Instead, she wore a simple wrapper and blouse, elegant but humble, appropriate for a wife of a villager. One of the older women adjusting her beads paused for a moment, her hands lingering. "You are too calm," the woman said softly. Mira met her reflection. "Should I not be?" she asked gently. The woman hesitated. "Most brides tremble," she admitted. Mira gave a faint smile. "Then perhaps I am not like most brides." But even as she spoke, her fingers tightened slightly in her lap, because calm did not mean she felt nothing. It simply meant she had chosen not to let her fears speak louder than her duty. Across the palace, Celine's chambers told a different story entirely. Laughter, music, excitement. Her wedding preparations were everything Mira's were not. Bright fabric spilled across the room. Gold jewelry glittered under the light, and servants moved quickly, trying to keep up with her endless instructions. "No, not that one," Selene snapped, pointing at a necklace. "The heavier one. I want it to shine." A group of young women giggled nearby, clearly feeding off her energy. "You will be the most beautiful bride any kingdom has ever seen," one of them said. Selene smiled, pleased. "I already am," she replied confidently. But beneath her excitement, something flickered, a thought she quickly pushed aside. She did not look toward Mira's chambers. She did not ask how her sister was doing, because doing so would force her to acknowledge something she wasn't ready to face. By midday, the ceremonies began. The palace courtyard was divided, not physically, but in spirit. On one side, the prince's wedding preparations shimmered with wealth and grandeur. Guests from distant lands had arrived, dressed in fine garments, their presence adding to the spectacle. On the other side, Mira's ceremony was quieter, simpler, more traditional. Villagers gathered, their expressions mixed, some curious, some respectful, some quietly sympathetic. At the center stood the man she was to marry, the warrior. For the first time, Mira truly looked at him, not as a figure in the arena, not as the man who had changed her fate, but as a person. He stood tall, his posture steady, his expression calm. His clothing was clean, though still simple. There was no arrogance in the way he carried himself, no attempt to impress. He did not look at the crowd. He did not seek their approval. Instead, his gaze rested briefly on her. And in that moment, something unexpected happened. There was no claim in his eyes, no pride, no sense of ownership, only quiet acknowledgement, as if he too understood the weight of what was happening. The ceremony was brief. There were no elaborate speeches, no excessive displays, just words spoken by the elders, blessings offered to the couple, and the binding of two lives under the watch of tradition. When it was done, Mira exhaled slowly. She was no longer just a princess. She was a wife. The sun had begun to lower when it was time for her to leave. That moment, that final moment, was the hardest. The palace gates stood open. A small gathering had formed. Servants, guards, a few elders. King Harlan stood at the front, waiting. Mira approached him slowly. Every step felt heavier than the last. This was the home she had always known, the walls that had watched her grow, the place where she had laughed, learned, dreamed, and now she was leaving it behind. Her father looked at her for a long time before speaking. "You have honored this kingdom," he said quietly. Mira lowered her gaze slightly. "I have only done what was expected of me." The king shook his head. "No," he said, "you have done more than that." There was something in his voice now, something softer, something almost fragile. "You have shown strength," he added. Mira felt her throat tighten slightly, but she nodded. "Take care of yourself, father," she said. He hesitated, then placed his hand gently on her head, in blessing. "Go with peace, my daughter." She turned, and for a moment she looked back, not at the palace, but at Celine. Celine stood at a distance, dressed in all her glory, surrounded by laughter and admiration. For a brief second, their eyes met. Mira offered a small smile. Celine did not return it. Instead, she looked away. And just like that, the moment passed. Mira climbed into the simple cart that would take her to her new home. Beside her stood her husband, silent, steady. The journey began. The road from the palace to the village was not long, but to Mira, it felt like crossing into another world. The paved paths gave way to dusty roads. The grand structures faded into mud houses. The sounds of royal life were replaced by the simple rhythm of village living. Children paused to stare as they passed. Women whispered. Men nodded respectfully. The princess. She has come to live among us. Can she truly endure this life? Finally, they arrived. The cart stopped. Mira stepped down slowly, and there it was, her new home. The hut was small, modest. Its walls were made of mud, its roof thatched with dried grass. There were no guards, no servants, no luxury, just simplicity, pure and undeniable. For a moment, Mira stood still, taking it in. This was real. This was her life now. I know it is not much. The voice startled her slightly. She turned. Her husband was looking at her, not with shame, but with honesty. It is all I have, he continued, but you are welcome here. Mira studied him. There was no apology in his tone, no attempt to impress, just truth. She nodded slowly. Thank you, she said, and meant it. He stepped forward, opening the door for her. Please, he said. She entered. Inside, the hut was even simpler. A small sleeping area, a wooden sow and stool, a clay pot in the corner. No decorations, no excess, just what was needed to live. Mira moved slowly, her fingers brushing lightly against the walls. This was not the life she had known, not even close. And yet, there was something about it, something quiet. Behind her, he spoke again. You may rest, he said. You must be tired. She turned slightly. And you? She asked. I will fetch water, he replied. Before she could respond, he stepped out. Mira stood alone in her new home, in her new life. She sat slowly on the edge of the small bed, her hands rested in her lap, her breathing steady, but thoughtful. This was not the future she had imagined, but it was the one she had chosen. Outside, the sun dipped lower. Inside, the air grew still. For the first time since everything began, Mira allowed herself to feel it all, the uncertainty, the change, the quiet fear. But beneath it all, there was something else, something small, something unexpected. Peace. And though she did not yet know it, this humble beginning would lead her to a life far greater than anything she had left behind. The first morning in Mira's new life did not arrive with royal greetings or the soft footsteps of servants outside her door. It arrived with sound, real sound, raw and unfiltered. The distant crowing of a rooster pierced the early dawn, followed by the low bleating of goats and the rhythmic thud of someone pounding yam nearby. The air carried the earthy scent of damp soil and wood smoke, drifting in through the small openings of the hut. Mira stirred slowly. For a moment, her body remained still, her eyes closed, her mind caught somewhere between memory and reality. She expected silk beneath her fingers. Instead, she felt rough fabric. She expected silence. Instead, life was already moving outside. Her eyes opened, and reality settled in. She sat up gently, her gaze moving around the small hut. The events of the previous day returned in quiet waves. The contest, the decision, the wedding, the journey, her new life. She exhaled softly, not in regret, but in acceptance. A faint sound came from outside, the creak of a wooden bucket, followed by footsteps. She turned toward the door just as it opened. Her husband stepped in. He carried a clay pot filled with water, his movements steady and unhurried. A light sheen of sweat covered his skin, evidence that he had already been awake for some time. When he saw her sitting up, he paused briefly. "You're awake," he said. His voice was calm, as always. Mira nodded. "Yes." He placed the pot carefully in the corner. "I fetched water," he said, "for washing and for the day." There was no expectation in his tone, no demand, just quiet provision. Mira watched him for a moment. "You woke early," she said. "I always do," he replied simply. She hesitated, then asked, Why didn't you wake me?" He glanced at her briefly. "You needed rest." The answer was so straightforward it caught her off guard. In the palace, everything had been done for her, not out of kindness, but out of duty. Servants served because they had to. But this felt different. "I can help," she said softly. He shook his head. "You will," he replied, "but not today." There was no condescension in his voice, only understanding. Later that morning, Mira stepped outside for the first time as a villager. The sunlight greeted her warmly, casting a soft glow over the land. The village was already alive. Women carrying water, men preparing tools, children chasing each other through narrow paths. But when she stepped out, everything paused. Not completely, but enough. Eyes turned. Whispers followed. "That is her, the princess. She truly came." Mira felt the weight of their gaze, not cruel, not hostile, just curious. A woman approached her slowly, balancing a basket on her head. "You are welcome," the woman said kindly. Mira offered a small smile. "Thank you." The woman nodded, then continued on her way. It was a simple interaction, but it eased something inside her. Over the next few days, Mira began to learn, not through instruction, but through observation, through doing, through living. She learned how to fetch water from the stream, carefully balancing the pot the way the other women did. She learned how to sweep the compound, her movements slower at first, then more natural. She learned how to cook over an open fire, the heat surprising her, the process unfamiliar. And through it all, he was there. He never hovered, never watched her with judgment, but he noticed everything. The first time she struggled to carry water, he took the pot from her, not with impatience, but with ease. "Not like this," he said gently, adjusting her grip. "Balance it here." His fingers brushed hers briefly as he guided her. The contact was light, but it lingered. Another day, she burned her hand slightly while cooking. She pulled back quickly, wincing. Before she could say anything, he was beside her. "Let me see," he said. She hesitated, then extended her hand. He examined it carefully, his touch surprisingly gentle for someone so strong. "It is not serious," he said, "but be careful." There was something in the way he said it, not as an instruction, but as concern. That night, as they sat outside the hut, the sky stretched endlessly above them, filled with stars. Mira had never seen the sky like this before. In the palace, the lights and walls had hidden its full beauty. But here, it was breathtaking. "You are quiet," he said. She glanced at him. "I am thinking." "About what?" She looked up at the sky again. "Everything." He nodded slightly. They sat in silence for a while. But it was not uncomfortable. "What is your name?" she asked suddenly. He looked at her. "Ronan," he said. She repeated it softly. "Ronan." The name felt right. "You never told me," she added. "You never asked," he replied. There was a hint of something in his voice, not humor exactly, but close. She smiled faintly. "I am asking now." He nodded. "And I have answered." Days turned into weeks, and something began to change. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily. Mira started to notice the small things. The way Ronan always made sure she ate before he did. The way he fixed things around the hut without being asked. The way he spoke, never raising his voice, never rushing his words. One evening, rain began to fall unexpectedly. Heavy, relentless. The roof of the hut began to leak slightly. Mira moved quickly, trying to adjust things to stop the water from dripping onto their bedding. Before she could manage it, Ronan stepped in. "Leave it," he said. He climbed up, securing the weak spots with practiced ease, his movements quick despite the rain pouring down on him. By the time he returned inside, he was soaked, completely. Mira stared at him. "You're drenched," she said. "It is nothing," he replied, brushing it off. But she frowned slightly. "No, it is not nothing." She disappeared briefly, then returned with a cloth. "Sit," she said. He hesitated, but something in her tone made him comply. She stood before him, gently drying his hair, then his shoulders. Her movements were careful, deliberate. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The space between them felt different now. Closer, warmer. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. He looked up at her. "I did." "Why?" He held her gaze for a moment, then looked away slightly. "Because you are my wife." The words were simple, but they carried weight. That night, as they lay on opposite sides of the small bed, the rain still tapping softly against the roof, Mira stared into the darkness. Her thoughts were no longer filled with uncertainty, or fear, or regret. Instead, they were filled with something new, something she had not expected. Respect, and somewhere beneath that, something softer, something warmer. She turned slightly, her gaze falling on Ronan's silhouette. He was already asleep, his breathing steady, peaceful. Mira watched him for a moment, then slowly, a small smile touched her lips. Because for the first time since leaving the palace, she felt something she had not dared to feel before. She felt at home. And though she did not yet call it love, it was already beginning to grow. Quietly, steadily, unstoppably. Celine's wedding was everything she had imagined, and more. From the moment the sun rose that day, the palace transformed into a spectacle of wealth and celebration. Musicians filled the air with vibrant rhythms. Dancers moved with elegance and energy, and guests from distant lands arrived in garments that shimmered with prestige. Gold adorned every corner, silk draped every surface. Even the air seemed heavier, perfumed with luxury. And at the center of it all was Celine. She stood before a tall mirror, surrounded by attendants who moved with urgency, adjusting her elaborate attire. Her wrapper was layered with intricate embroidery, each thread catching the light like fire. Heavy gold necklaces rested on her neck, bracelets lined her wrists, and her hair was styled with precision, crowned with ornaments that marked her as royalty. She looked like a queen. No, she looked like power. "You are breathtaking," one of the attendants whispered. Celine smiled. "I know," she replied softly, her voice filled with satisfaction. But beneath that satisfaction, there was something else. A quiet excitement, a belief that everything she had fought for, everything she had demanded, was finally within her grasp. Outside, the crowd erupted as Prince Caspian arrived. He did not come quietly. He came with presence. His procession was even grander than before. More guards, more attendants, more wealth displayed openly. Horses adorned in decorated armor, servants carrying gifts, musicians announcing his arrival with powerful beats. He stepped down from his carriage with practiced elegance, confident, commanding, untouchable. When Celine saw him, her heart lifted. This was what she had chosen. This was what she deserved. The ceremony itself was extravagant. Unlike Myra's simple union, this was a display meant to impress, to dominate, to remind everyone present of power and status. The vows were spoken loudly, the blessings echoed, the cheers were endless. And when it was done, Selene became the wife of a prince. The journey to his kingdom was just as grand. Selene sat beside him in a luxurious carriage, cushioned seats beneath her, fine fabrics surrounding her. Outside, the world moved quickly, but she barely noticed. Her eyes were on him. "You are quiet," Caspian said, glancing at her. "I am happy," she replied. He smiled faintly. "As you should be." There was something about the way he said it. Not warm, not dismissive, just certain. At first, Selene didn't question it. Why would she? Everything around her confirmed that she had made the right choice. When they arrived at his kingdom, Selene was overwhelmed. The palace was massive, larger than her father's, with towering structures, wide courtyards, and decorations that screamed wealth at every turn. Servants lined the entrance, bowing as she stepped out. "Welcome, my queen," one of them said. Selene inhaled deeply. Yes, this was her place. The first few days passed like a dream. Banquets were held in her honor. She wore new outfits every evening, each more beautiful than the last. She was introduced to nobles, dignitaries, and powerful figures who treated her with admiration. Everywhere she went, she was praised, celebrated, desired. But slowly, subtly, something began to shift. It started with small things easy to ignore. The first time, it was at a banquet. Caspian sat beside her, laughing loudly, a cup of wine constantly in his hand. First, it seemed normal, a celebration. But as the night went on, the laughter grew louder, less controlled, less refined. "A little too much," Selene whispered lightly, placing a hand on his arm. He glanced at her briefly, then pulled away. "I am enjoying myself," he said. His tone wasn't harsh, but it wasn't gentle either. She smiled it off. Of course, it was just one night. But then it happened again and again. Soon, Selene began to notice a pattern. Caspian drank often, not just during celebrations, but in private moments too. One evening, she entered their chamber to find him seated alone, a bottle beside him. "You started without me?" she teased lightly. He didn't respond immediately, just took another drink. "Selene," he said after a moment, his voice slower than usual. "Do you know what it means to be king?" She tilted her head slightly. "You are not king yet," she replied gently. He laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Not yet," he repeated, "but soon." She stepped closer. "And when you are, you will be great," she said. He looked at her then, really looked, and for a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes, something dark. "Greatness is expensive," he said. She frowned slightly. "I don't understand." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You will." Selene's unease began to grow. Then came the nights he didn't return. First, she waited patiently. A prince had responsibilities, meetings, duties, but one night turned into 2, then 3. When he finally returned, the smell hit her first. Alcohol. Strong. Overpowering. "Where have you been?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. He shrugged off his outer garment. "Out." That is not an answer. He turned to her slowly. "And I do not owe you one." The words stung, sharp, unexpected. "I am your wife," she said. "And I am your husband," he replied, "not your servant." Silence filled the room. Celine swallowed. This was not the man she had imagined, not the man she had chosen. But she wasn't ready to accept that yet. Then came the whispers. Servants talked quietly, carefully, but Celine heard enough. The prince was seen at the gambling house again. He lost heavily last night. They say he borrowed money. Celine confronted him. "You gamble?" she asked, her voice tight. He didn't deny it. "Sometimes." "How much have you lost?" He smirked slightly. "Does it matter?" "Yes, it matters," she snapped. "You are a prince. You have responsibilities." He stepped closer, his presence suddenly overwhelming. "Do not lecture me," he said quietly. Celine felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger, not pride. Fear. She stepped back slightly. The room felt different now. Smaller. Colder. Days passed, then weeks. The truth became impossible to ignore. Caspian was not just a drinker. He was dependent. Not just a gambler. He was reckless. The man she had chosen was not a dream. He was a storm. One evening, Celine sat alone in her chamber. The silence pressed against her. No laughter, no music, no admiration, just thoughts. Her mind drifted back to the palace, back to that moment, back to Mira, her sister's calm voice. "I will marry the warrior." Celine's chest tightened. She shook her head quickly. "No," she whispered to herself. "I made the right choice." But the words felt hollow, because for the first time, Celine began to wonder, what if she hadn't? Outside, the palace remained grand, beautiful, impressive. But inside, Celine felt it clearly now. She was not living in a dream. She was living in a cage, a golden one, and the door was slowly closing. The message arrived at dawn. It came quietly, without ceremony, without warning. Carried by a lone messenger whose face told the story before his lips ever moved. By the time he was ushered into the palace, the air had already changed. Servants moved slower. Guards spoke in hushed tones. Something was wrong. Celine stood at the balcony of her chamber, watching the early light stretch across the kingdom. The sky was pale, almost uncertain, as though even the sun hesitated to rise fully. She hadn't slept well, not for many nights now. A restless unease had settled deep within her, a feeling she could no longer ignore, no matter how hard she tried to bury it beneath fine clothes and forced smiles. Behind her, the doors opened. A servant stepped in, bowing low. "My lady, the prince requests your presence in the council hall." Celine turned slowly. "At this hour?" The servant hesitated. "There has been news." Her heart tightened. Without another word, she moved quickly, her steps echoing softly through the long corridors of the palace. Something about the silence unsettled her. This was not the lively, indulgent palace she had grown used to. This felt different, heavy. When she reached the council hall, the doors were already open. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Elders stood in small groups, whispering urgently. Advisors paced. Guards stood more rigid than usual. And at the center of it all was Caspian. He stood near the throne, his back slightly turned, a cup in his hand. Even now, even in this moment, Celine stepped inside. "What is happening?" she asked. The room fell quiet. All eyes turned to her. Caspian didn't answer immediately. He took a slow drink, then turned. His expression was unreadable. "My father is dead," he said. The words struck like thunder. For a moment, Celine said nothing. The room seemed to tilt slightly, the weight of the news pressing against her chest. "The king dead?" "Aye," she began, but the words caught in her throat. She didn't know what to say. What could be said? The elders bowed their heads. "Mourn the king," one of them said, solemnly. "May his spirit find rest among the ancestors." Celine looked at Caspian. She expected sorrow, grief, something. But what she saw instead was something else. Not sadness, not pain. Relief. It was subtle, barely there. But she saw it, and it chilled her. The burial rites were carried out swiftly. Tradition demanded it. The entire kingdom gathered to honor the fallen king. Drums beat slowly, their rhythm heavy with loss. Women wailed, their cries echoing across the land. Men stood in solemn silence, their heads bowed in respect. Celine played her part. She dressed in mourning. She stood beside Caspian. She lowered her head when expected, but her mind was elsewhere because she could not shake what she had seen, that flicker in his eyes. And soon, her unease would prove justified. The coronation came quickly, too quickly. Before the kingdom had fully processed its loss, preparations began for the rise of a new ruler, Caspian. The ceremony was grand, just as everything in this kingdom was. Gold adorned the throne. The finest fabrics were displayed. The people gathered, hopeful, because despite everything, they believed. They believed that with new leadership would come new strength, new stability, a new beginning. Celine stood beside him as the crown was placed upon his head. She forced a smile. This was what she had wanted, wasn't it? "Long live the king," the crowd shouted. "Long live King Caspian." He raised his hand, acknowledging them, his expression confident, commanding. And for a brief moment, Celine allowed herself to hope. Maybe this would change him. Maybe responsibility would ground him. Maybe power would bring discipline. Maybe everything would finally fall into place. But hope can be a dangerous thing, because reality came quickly, and it came hard. At first it was subtle, small decisions, minor changes. Caspian began spending more time in private gatherings than in council meetings. When advisors came with concerns, he dismissed them. When elders offered guidance, he ignored them. "You worry too much," he told Celine one evening, lounging lazily with a drink in hand. "This is a kingdom," she replied, "not a game." He smirked. "Everything is a game," he said. "You just have to know how to play it." She didn't like the way he said that. Then came the spending, lavish feasts, endless celebrations, new luxuries brought into the palace. At first, it seemed like celebration, a new king enjoying his reign. But it didn't stop. Gold reserves began to thin. Treasures were sold. Taxes were raised. The whispers returned, louder this time, harder to ignore. "The treasury is being drained. The king spends without limit. We cannot sustain this." Celine confronted him again. "You are losing control," she said, her voice firm. He laughed. "I am in complete control. You are not listening to your advisors. I don't need them. You are gambling with the kingdom." That made him pause. Slowly he turned to her, his eyes sharper now. "Be careful," he said quietly. Celine held his gaze. "I am your wife. I will speak the truth." He stepped closer. Too close. "And I am your king," he replied. "Remember that." The distance between them grew. Then came the debts. Not whispers now. Facts. Caspian had borrowed heavily from merchants, from nobles, from neighboring lands, and he continued to gamble, lose, borrow, repeat. The cycle tightened like a noose. One night, Celine walked into a chamber she had never entered before. Inside, she saw it. Coins scattered across the table, cards in men's hands, laughter, tension, and Caspian at the center of it all. "Stop," she said. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to her. Caspian leaned back slightly, unimpressed. "You should not be here," he said. "You are destroying everything," she replied. The men exchanged glances, uncomfortable. Caspian stood slowly. "Leave," he told the others. They didn't hesitate. Soon, it was just the two of them. "You embarrass me," he said. "You disgrace yourself," she shot back. His hand slammed against the table. The sound echoed. "You think you understand power?" he said. "I understand consequences." He laughed again, but this time there was no humor in it. "Consequences are for the weak," he said. Celine stared at him, and in that moment, she knew this would not get better. It would only get worse. And it did. Within months, the kingdom began to crumble. Trade slowed. People grew restless. Resources thinned. The palace remained beautiful, but beyond its walls, the cracks were spreading. And inside those walls, Celine sat alone more often than not. The laughter was gone. The excitement faded. The illusion shattered. One evening, she stood at the same balcony where she had once admired her new life. But now, she saw it clearly. The kingdom was falling. Her marriage was breaking. And her choices had led her here. Her mind drifted again, back to Mira, her sister, who had chosen the life Celine rejected. A simple life. A quiet life. A life that suddenly did not seem so foolish. Celine closed her eyes. For the first time since everything began, she allowed the truth to settle. She had not escaped a lesser fate. She had walked straight into a greater one. And now, there was no easy way out. Mourning in the village no longer felt unfamiliar to Mira. It felt natural. The sounds that had once startled her, the crowing of roosters, the rhythmic pounding of yam, the chatter of women heading to the stream, had become part of her daily rhythm. She woke with the sun now, not because she had to, but because her body had learned to. On this particular morning, soft golden light slipped through the cracks of the hut, gently warming the small space. Mira stirred, stretching slightly before sitting up. For a moment, she simply sat there, listening, feeling, breathing. Then she glanced to her side. Ronan was already gone. A small smile touched her lips. He always woke before her. Always. She stood, tying her wrapper securely, and stepped outside. The air was fresh, cool against her skin. The village was already alive, but in a way that felt calm. Not rushed, not chaotic, just alive. She spotted him not far away. Ronan stood near the edge of their small farm, working the soil with steady, practiced movements. His back glistened lightly with sweat, his focus entirely on the task before him. Mira paused for a moment, watching him, not as a stranger, not even just as a husband, but as someone she had come to understand. There was something deeply reassuring about him, something constant. "You woke up early again," she called as she approached. He glanced up briefly. "You woke up later," he replied. There was a hint of teasing in his tone now, something that hadn't been there in the beginning. Mira smiled. I am improving. He nodded, returning to his work. That is good. She moved closer, kneeling beside him. Show me, she said. He looked at her. You already know how. I want to know better. For a moment he studied her. Then, without a word, he shifted slightly, making space for her. And just like that, they worked together. The sun climbed higher as they moved in quiet coordination, digging, planting, adjusting the soil. There was no need for constant conversation. Their silence was no longer unfamiliar. It was comfortable. You press too hard, he said after a while. Mira glanced at him. You always say that. Because you always do it. She laughed softly. And you always correct me. He paused, then looked at her. And you always listen. Something in the way he said it made her glance up. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, the world felt still. Then he looked away first, clearing his throat slightly. We should finish this before the sun gets too hot, he said. Mira smiled to herself. Later that day, she joined the other women at the stream. This, too, had become part of her life. At first, the trips had been quiet, her presence drawing curious looks and hushed whispers. But now, things had changed. Mira, one of the women called as she approached. You are late today. Mira laughed lightly. I was working, she replied. Working, another teased. The princess now works like the rest of us? Mira lifted her chin playfully. I am no longer a princess here. The women exchanged glances, then smiled. No, the first one said. You are something else. Mira tilted her head. And what is that? The woman shrugged. Someone we respect. The words were simple, but they landed deeply, because respect here was earned. As they filled their pots and began the walk back, the conversation flowed easily. Stories were shared, laughter echoed. Mira listened and spoke and laughed. And in those moments, she didn't feel like someone who had lost a life. She felt like someone who had found one. Back at the hut, she prepared the evening meal. The fire crackled softly, the aroma of food rising into the air. Ronan sat nearby, repairing a tool, his hands moving with quiet precision. You have improved, he said suddenly. Mira glanced at him. In cooking, he nodded. She smiled. I had a good teacher. He shook his head. You had patience. She paused, then said softly, I had no choice. He looked at her then. Choice is not always what shapes us, he said. Sometimes it is what we do after. Mira considered that. You speak like a man who has lived many lives, she said. He didn't respond immediately, just returned to his work, and for the first time, Mira noticed it. The mystery. There were things about Ronan she did not know, things he did not speak of, a past he kept quiet. But strangely, it didn't trouble her, because who he was now was enough. That evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in warm shades of orange and gold, they sat outside once more. You are different, Ronan said. Mira raised an eyebrow. Different from what? From when you first came? She nodded slowly. Yes. He studied her. Do you regret it? The question lingered between them. Mira looked out at the village, at the people, at the life she had built. Then she shook her head. No. The answer surprised even her. I thought I would, she admitted, at first. He waited. But I don't, she continued. Not anymore. Why? She turned to him. Because I am not just living, she said. I am living well. He held her gaze, and this time he didn't look away. A soft breeze passed between them. The moment stretched, then slowly he smiled. It was small, subtle, but real. And Mira felt something shift inside her, something warm, something certain. That night, as they lay beside each other, the silence between them was no longer filled with distance. It was filled with understanding. Mira closed her eyes. Her mind did not wander to the palace, to wealth, to what she had lost. Instead, it rested here, in the quiet, in the simplicity, in the presence of a man who had never promised her anything, but had given her everything she didn't know she needed. And somewhere in the stillness of that night, without words, without declarations, love took root, deep, steady, uninterruptible. And far away, in a palace filled with gold and regret, Celine sat alone. Because while one sister had built a life from nothing, the other was watching everything fall apart. And neither of them yet knew that the greatest change was still coming. The day began like any other, calm, predictable, peaceful. The morning sun rose gently over the village, spilling soft light across the land. A faint breeze moved through the trees, carrying with it the familiar sense of earth and firewood. Mira was already awake. By now, her body no longer resisted the rhythm of village life. It had embraced it. She stepped outside the hut, tying her wrapper as she moved, her eyes scanning the compound. Ronan was there. Of course he was. He stood near the wooden fence, adjusting one of the posts that had loosened during the night. His movements were quiet, but purposeful. His strength evident even in the simplest tasks. Mira watched him for a moment, a small smile forming on her lips. There was comfort in this, in knowing what to expect, in knowing him. "You will fix everything in this village if you are not careful," she called out lightly. He glanced at her satyr, the corner of his mouth lifting faintly. "Only what needs fixing," he replied. She walked toward him. "And who decides what needs fixing?" He straightened slightly, meeting her gaze. "I do." Mira laughed softly. "Of course you do." It was a simple exchange, light, easy, the kind of moment that had become normal between them. And yet, neither of them knew it would be one of the last moments of normal, because not long after, something unusual happened. First, it was just a sound, faint, distant, a low, unfamiliar hum. Mira paused, her head tilting slightly. "Do you hear that?" she asked. Ronan stilled. His expression shifted just slightly. "I do," he said. The sound grew louder, stronger. It wasn't like anything the village was used to. Not the creaking of carts, not the hooves of horses, not the chatter of people. This was different. The ground itself seemed to react, a subtle vibration beneath their feet. By now, others had noticed. Villagers began stepping out of their homes, their faces filled with curiosity. "What is that? Where is it coming from?" Children ran toward the main path, excitement lighting up their faces. And then, they saw it. A car. Not just any car. A sleek, polished Rolls-Royce. Its black exterior gleamed under the sunlight, reflecting the world around it like a mirror. It moved smoothly along the dusty road, untouched by the roughness beneath it. As if it did not belong to the earth, it traveled on. The entire village froze. Some stepped back instinctively. Others moved closer, drawn by curiosity. Have you ever seen something like that? No. It must belong to a king. The car slowed as it approached, and then it stopped, right in front of Myra and Ronan's hut. Silence fell, heavy, complete. Mira's heart began to beat faster. "This must be a mistake," she whispered. Ronan said nothing, but his eyes had sharpened. The car doors opened. 2 men stepped out. They were dressed in suits, perfectly tailored, clean and sharp. Their shoes barely seemed to touch the ground as they walked. Their movements controlled and deliberate. They did not look like anyone from the village. They looked like men from another world. One of them adjusted his tie slightly before speaking. "Good afternoon," he said. His voice was calm, professional, but his eyes were searching. "Good afternoon," Mira replied cautiously. The man's gaze shifted past her to Ronan. "Are you Ronan?" he asked. There was a pause, a brief one, but enough to be noticed. Ronan stepped forward slightly. "Yes," he said. The 2 men exchanged a glance, and then they smiled, not casually, not politely, but with relief. "Finally," one of them said under his breath. Mira frowned slightly. "Is there a problem?" she asked. The first man turned to her. "No, my lady," he said. "On the contrary, we believe we have just found the solution." The words made little sense, but before Mira could respond, the second man stepped forward. "We have been searching for you," he said to Ronan. Ronan's expression remained unreadable. "For me?" he asked. "Yes," the man replied. "For many years." A ripple of murmur spread through the villagers. Mira felt her pulse quicken. "This must be some kind of mistake," she said. The man shook his head. "It is not." He reached into a leather folder and pulled out a set of documents. "Your name is Ronan Okafor," he said. Ronan's brow furrowed slightly. "Yes. You were separated from your family many years ago." Silence. Mira looked at him. He hadn't told her this. "You were believed to be lost," the man continued, "but your father never stopped searching." Ronan's jaw tightened slightly. "My father is dead," he said. The man nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "He passed away recently." Something shifted in the air. "But before his death," the man continued, "he gave us one final instruction." Mira felt her breath catch. "To find his son." The words echoed. "To find you." The villagers were completely silent now. Every eye was fixed on Ronan. The man stepped closer. "Your father," he said, "was one of the wealthiest men in the world." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Mira's mind struggled to process the words. "Wealthiest in the world?" "That is not possible," she whispered. But the man continued. "And as his only son, everything now belongs to you." The world seemed to stop. Mira looked at Ronan, at the man she had lived with, worked with, loved, the man she believed she understood. And suddenly, everything felt different. Ronan stood still, completely still, as if the weight of those words had rooted him to the ground. "I don't understand," he said finally. The man softened slightly. "You were taken away as a child," he explained. "Circumstances beyond your control. You were raised here, unaware of your true identity." Mira's heart pounded. This was not real. Couldn't be. But the car, the men, the documents, it all felt too precise to be a lie. "We have proof," the second man added, holding out the papers. Ronan hesitated, then took them. His eyes moved across the pages slowly, and as he read, something changed. Not dramatically, not visibly, but Mira saw it. Recognition, a flicker of something buried deep. Memories. "Is it true?" she asked softly. He didn't answer immediately. Then quietly, "Yes." The word hit her like a wave. The villagers erupted into whispers. The warrior, the poor man, the richest man's son? Mira stepped back slightly. Her mind raced. All this time, he had been more than she ever imagined. And yet, he had lived so simply, so quietly, beside her. The first man cleared his throat gently. "There is much to discuss," he said. "Arrangements to be made." Ronan looked at him, then at Mira, and for a moment, everything else faded. "Will you come with us?" the man asked. The question hung in the air, heavy, because it was not just about him, it was about them. Mira's heart tightened. Everything was about to change again. But this time, she did not know if she was ready, or if she would lose the life she had just begun to love. Ronan took a slow breath, then spoke. "We will talk," he said. "We." The words settled gently, but firmly, and Mira felt something steady inside her. Whatever came next, they would face it together. But deep down, she knew nothing would ever be the same again. The village did not return to normal that day. Couldn't. Not after what had happened. Long after the sleek men in suits had stepped back respectfully, the air still carried the weight of revelation. The strongest man in the kingdom, the quiet farmer, the man who lived in a mud hut, was the son of one of the richest men in the world. The villagers did not leave. They lingered in clusters, whispering, glancing toward the hut as though expecting something else to happen, something even greater. But nothing did, at least not immediately. Inside the hut, everything felt smaller, not physically, but emotionally. Mira stood near the doorway, her hands clasped tightly together. She had not moved much since the revelation, had not spoken much either. Across from her, Ronan sat on the wooden stool, the documents still in his hands. He had read them, twice, maybe more, but the words did not feel real. They sat on the page like someone else's story, not his. "You knew," Mira said softly. The words broke the silence. Ronan looked up. There was no anger in her voice, no accusation, just quiet searching. "I remembered pieces," he admitted. Mira stepped closer. "Pieces?" He nodded slowly. "Things that never made sense," he said. "Dreams, places, voices." He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I thought they were just that. Dreams." Mira studied him. "And now?" He looked at the papers again. "Now, I think they were memories." Silence settled again, but it was different this time. Heavier. Mira lowered herself onto the edge of the bed. "What happens now?" she asked. It was a simple question, but it carried everything. Ronan did not answer immediately, because for the first time in a long time, he did not know. Outside, the men in suits waited patiently. They had seen reactions like this before. Shock, disbelief, resistance. But they also knew something else. Truth always settles. Eventually, a soft knock came at the door. "May we come in?" one of the men asked. Ronan glanced at Mira, then nodded. "Come in." The men entered carefully, their presence once again contrasting sharply with the simplicity of the hut. "We understand this is overwhelming," the first man said. Ronan said nothing. The man continued. "Your father was a powerful man, not just wealthy, but respected across nations." Mira listened closely. "He searched for you for years," the man added. He never stopped believing you were alive. Something tightened in Ronan's chest. He left everything in your name, the second man said. His companies, his estates, his accounts. Mira's breath caught slightly. Everything? The scale of it was impossible to grasp. There are responsibilities, the first man continued. Decisions that must be made. People who depend on what he built. Ronan's gaze hardened slightly. I didn't build any of that, he said. The man nodded. No, but it is yours now. Ronan looked down at his hands. Rough, calloused. These were not the hands of a wealthy man. I am a farmer, he said quietly. The second man stepped forward slightly. You are more than that. Ronan looked up. For a moment there was tension. Then Mira spoke. You are both, she said softly. The room shifted. Ronan looked at her. She held his gaze. You are the man who built this life, she continued, and the man who has just discovered another. Her voice was calm, grounding. You don't have to choose one over the other, she added. The words settled into him. Slowly, deeply. The first man cleared his throat gently. We have prepared arrangements, he said. If you choose to come with us, everything is ready. Mira felt her heart tighten again. This was it. The moment. Ronan looked at her, and in that look there was a question, not spoken, but clear. Will you come with me? Mira didn't hesitate. Where you go? She said softly. I go. Something shifted in his eyes. Relief. Not because of the wealth, not because of the future, but because of her. He nodded once, then turned to the men. We will come, he said. Outside, the villagers watched as the decision was made. Some were shocked, others proud. He is still one of us, an elder said quietly, and he always will be, another replied. The departure was not grand. There were no celebrations, no loud farewells, just quiet acknowledgement. Mira stood for a moment before entering the car. She looked back at the hut, at the life she had built. It was small, simple, but it had been real, and she would carry it with her, always. She stepped inside. The door closed, and just like that, another chapter of her life ended. The journey to the city was long. The road changed gradually from dirt to stone to smooth pavement. The world outside the window transformed. Buildings grew taller, structures more complex, people more hurried. Mira watched it all in silence. It was overwhelming, but she did not feel lost because beside her, Ronan sat just as quietly, processing, thinking, feeling. When they finally arrived, even he paused. Before them stood a mansion. No, an estate. Massive, elegant, impossible. Gates opened automatically. Guards stood at attention. Servants lined the entrance. This is your home, one of the men said. Mira felt her breath catch. This was the other life. Ronan stepped out of the car slowly. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, quietly, "This is not who I am," he said. Mira stepped beside him. "No," she replied gently. He looked at her. "But it is part of your story," she added. He took a deep breath, then nodded. Together, they walked forward. Not as strangers to wealth, not as people consumed by it, but as two people who had already learned something far greater than riches. How to live, how to love, how to remain grounded even when the world beneath them changed. Inside the mansion, everything gleamed. But for Mira, it did not feel more valuable than the hut, 'cause value was not in walls or gold, or power. It was in people, in choices, in character. And as she stood there, beside the man who had been both poor and powerful, she realized something. The world had finally caught up to who he truly was, but it had not changed him, and it would not change her, because their strength had never come from what they owned, but from who they were. Power does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrives quietly. Months had passed since Mira and Ronan left the village, since the revelation that turned their lives upside down. Months since the world shifted. And yet, inside the grand estate they now called home, there was no chaos, no arrogance, no reckless display of wealth. There was order, calm, purpose. The estate itself was alive with activity, workers moving efficiently, vehicles arriving and leaving, decisions being made that affected lives far beyond its gates. But at the center of it all stood Ronan. Not as a confused villager, not as an overwhelmed heir, but as a man who had chosen who he would be. He had learned quickly, not because he was chasing power, but because he understood responsibility. In the beginning, the transition had not been easy. There were meetings he did not fully understand, decisions that felt too large, expectations that pressed heavily on his shoulders. But he listened, he observed, he asked questions, and slowly, he adapted. Not by becoming someone else, but by bringing who he already was into this new world. He treated workers with respect. He refused unnecessary extravagance. He focused on rebuilding systems his father had left behind, not for profit alone, but for stability. "Power is not what you take," he said once during a meeting. "It is what you protect." The room had fallen silent, not because they were surprised, but because they understood. This was not the kind of man they were used to, and beside him was Mira. She had changed too, but not in the way people expected. She wore fine clothes now, lived in luxury, moved among influential people, but none of it had altered her essence. She still woke early, still preferred quiet moments, still spoke with kindness that disarmed even the most hardened individuals. Servants admired her, not out of obligation, but out of genuine respect. "She greets us by name," one whispered. "She listens," another said. "She sees us," a third added, because Mira had lived without all this, and she had not forgotten. Together, they became something rare. Not just powerful, but grounded. Not just wealthy, but respected. And slowly, their influence spread. Villages once ignored began receiving support. Farmers were given resources. Communities strengthened. Ronan did not forget where he came from, and Mira made sure of it. "Never lose the soil beneath your feet," she would say. And he never did. But far away, in a crumbling kingdom once filled with pride, a different story was unfolding. Celine stood at the balcony of a palace that no longer felt like a home. The walls were still grand, the structure still impressive, but everything else had faded. The servants were fewer now, the halls quieter, the once vibrant energy replaced by something heavy. Decay. King Caspian's rule had done what many feared. It had broken the kingdom. Debt had consumed resources. Trade had collapsed. Trust had vanished. And still, he had not changed. Celine closed her eyes. There was a time when she had stood in a place like this, full of excitement, full of certainty. Now, all she felt was emptiness. Behind her, a crash echoed. She didn't turn immediately. She didn't need to. "I said I want more," Caspian's voice roared. Celine finally turned. He stood in the room, unsteady, a cup in his hand, his anger filling the space like a storm. "There is nothing left," she said quietly. He laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "There is always something left," he snapped. "Not anymore." Their eyes met. For a moment, there was silence. Then he looked away, because even he knew the truth. Everything was gone. Celine stepped back slowly. This was not the life she had chosen, but it was the life she had created. And now she had to face it. Days later, the decision was made. Celine left. Not in grandeur, not with celebration, but quietly. She returned to Obiora, not as the proud princess who once demanded control, but as a woman who had learned. The journey back felt longer than it had before. Every step carried memory. Every mile carried regret. When she arrived, the kingdom looked the same, but she did not. The palace gates opened, and for the first time she did not walk in with confidence. She walked in with humility. King Harlan was gone now. Time had taken him, and the palace felt different without him. Celine moved through its halls slowly. Everything felt familiar, yet distant. Then she heard it. Voices and something else. Movement. She turned toward the sound and froze, because standing in the courtyard was a sight she never expected to see. A luxurious convoy. Vehicles unlike anything Obiora had ever witnessed. People gathered. Whispers filled the air. And at the center of it all was Mira, dressed in elegance, radiating quiet confidence. Beside her stood Ronan, not as the villager, not as the stranger, but as a man the world now recognized. Celine's breath caught. For a moment, she couldn't move. This was the life she had rejected, and now it stood before her, transformed. Mira turned. Their eyes met, and in that moment, time seemed to fold in on itself. Celine stepped forward slowly, her pride, her anger, her certainty, all gone. "I was wrong," she said. The words came out quietly, but they carried everything. Mira said nothing at first. She simply looked at her sister, really looked at her, at the change, at the weight she carried. Then she stepped forward and embraced her. Celine froze. Then lowly she held her back. Tears filled her eyes. "I chose wrongly," she whispered. Mira shook her head gently. "You chose what you believed was right," she said. Celine pulled back slightly. "And you?" she asked. "Did you never regret it?" Mira smiled softly. "No." The answer was simple, certain, and it broke something in Celine. Not painfully, but completely. Because in that moment, she understood. True wealth was not what she had chased. It was what Mira had found, and what Ronan had always been. Strength, character, love. Not chosen in pride, but built in humility. As the sun set over Obiora once more, the story came full circle. Two sisters, two choices, two paths, and one truth. Life does not reward pride. It reveals it. And in the end, it is not what we are given, but who we choose to become that defines our crown.